God. Let's go.
All right. I'm Ian.
I'm Chris.
I'm Patrick.
And we're the Fate Boys. Woo! We are back. Fate Boys After Dark.
For
back,
another
everyone.
one.
All right. So leading
Welcome
us
to
off.
Episode 5.
5. I know it's crazy. All right. So leading us off, we're going to pick from the Jar of Fate because we're obsessed now. This is totally the new way that we're going about this.
It's
My turn?
This is Chris's turn. to
Oh my
pick.
God. What does fate have in store for us today? Fate on the wall. What's the fatiest of them all? Holy shit.
What do we got?
Predestination versus sovereignty.
Ooh, it's almost like a callback to the first episode.
A little bit.
That's how we started.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting prompt though. Like what sovereignty?
Those
Is
seem
there
different
no
to me.
sovereignty in
Those seem different to me.
predestination?
Those seem
So-
different to me.
Predestination, in terms of fate, already being laid out for you. You don't have any role in navigating it or impacting it. Impacting is the word I wanted to use. And then sovereignty being like I control my own destiny and the way life unfolds. for
So
me.
it's kind of the same thing.
Mhm.
It's interesting because the term like you use the term sovereignty or sovereignty, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's having the ability. I mean, let's look up those definitions for sure.
Yeah.
To see what Webster's or OED has to say on the matter.
Sovereign always has like a royal tinge to me, like
Mhm.
like I think of like a king that's
Be
sovereign.
sovereign.
Like it's the ultimate ruler. And so but it's weird because like there's a sense, at least in my understanding, is, and I mean in the first episode we talked about like fate, and then you take hold of it and it's like destiny. So it's like I think there can be sovereignty within even a predestined approach.
Like when you're taking action on the path of predestination.
Yeah, I mean, because predestination is a tough topic to say, because I think that leads really opens to the conversation of will and like
Great. I mean, let's throw it in there.
because what is predestination? It's essentially saying like there is no real free will, right?
Mhm.
And it's like it's weird though, because it's like we are all still, at least in a really complex way, functioning from a place of complexity. And like so there is love. I think there's will, but there's levels of will. That's my understanding
I
of
like
will.
that.
You know, there's like
Levels of will.
that's to me the more interesting approach right now around this.
I mean, I think we're gonna unpack this a lot.
Yeah.
Because it does kind of tie back into it, but it kind of puts a different spin on it,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying destiny and fate. We're talking about predestination versus sovereignty specifically. Okay, so when I hear I use the term sovereignty all the time, and when I talk about it, what I'm talking about is more around agency
Mhm.
of you being authentically coming from your highest self, your sovereign self. Again, that kind of ties into the royalty thing.
Mhm.
But your ability to make decisions based on you having that level of agency, and I talk about it with myself. I
So
talk
levels.
about it. Yeah. But I would
There's
say
levels to this shit. Man.
sure, but I would say that there's a lot of people who feel beholden and stuck and trapped in a way of being in the world,
Mhm.
and they think that they don't have any agency at all. I would say
Mhm.
agency is kind of in this conversation as well. So we have will, we have agency coming in.
Mhm.
And they feel like there's nothing that they really can do, like it's out of their hands.
Yeah.
And when you can put your hands back on the wheel in your own life, and the way that I've done that in my life several times, I've had to restart again multiple times. And when I recognize that I have the ability to take control of my situation rather than feeling at the whim of predestination.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't even say it's an opposing predestination, because I like how you're saying it kind of fits in like a nesting Russian doll within that, because I feel like there are bullet points along the
Yeah.
path of predestination where you do have agency, even if you end up at the same
Right.
place.
I want to know what you guys think about something that just hit me. I've never thought about this in terms of the word predestination before. It almost implies like there is a plan. It's just not your plan.
Interesting.
And then
yeah.
when you use the word whim, that really hit me.
Mm.
So when you guys think of predestination, do you think of, oh, there is a structure and a given unfolding to my life that I just don't have as much direct control over as I might like, or is it total randomness?
Well, predestination, it was big for me growing up because the religious environment. So like, obviously there's like all these sorts of ideas within different religious groups, but at least in like Christian school, there's a lot of people almost had that predestination. But I like what you were talking about, agency, and I think sometimes it's an either or. But I think it's to levels. It's like you're essentially predestined until you gain agency. And that's where my question to either of you was, what was your take on predestination before this concept that you have now around agency, and what was it that shifted or started feeling like you were able to capture and start regaining agency, and maybe even developed it to a level of sovereignty?
Ian, you should hit this first. I feel like you had a personal story ready to rock.
I mean, I didn't have one like queued up. I think for me, when I think about predestination, when I was younger, I would have this jealousy of people who already knew what they wanted to be.
Yeah.
So people are like, they're always going to be a doctor. Yeah, the writing was on the wall. They were going to be a firefighter. Like ever since they were a kid, they were playing with firefighter stuff. They knew like that was their jam. That was what they're going to be.
They didn't struggle.
They were really into math. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so when I would look at that, and I felt like I go by the rapping moniker MC Renaissance, because I always feel like I've been a Renaissance man of a person of jack of all trades. This idea of pretty good at everything I touch. Like anything that I try or put my attention towards, I'm pretty good at. I get savvy at it, but I never felt like I really excelled at any of them to the point where it really defined me as being the ultimate thing. And I struggled with trying to understand and making a decision about where I was headed in my life. So let's go back to like end of high school age. So like 18, 19, going into college, that time period, and feeling the pressure of like, oh man, I better pick the right thing.
Right.
And almost the opposite of predestination, of feeling like I'm the only one who is going to make this call. Otherwise I'm going to be screwed. Well, I still had this tableau or this sheet being laid out as like, you're going to find your way. You know, my mom was always really supportive, and she's like, you're going to figure it out. It's going to be fine. You're so creative, all these things, all this adulation. And that feels great. You know, it fills your cup to a certain point, but it also doesn't help, because when you're in it, you just want someone to give you the answer.
And especially when you're in your 20s.
Well, that's where like structure is so important. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking of a different cultural perspective, because in the US especially, it's like, I need to make a decision about my life and I can be whatever I want. And it's interesting because in Spain, when you go to college, you basically can only study what you have good grades in. So like, if you don't get a good enough grade, you're not going to study biology. You're not going to become a doctor.
I mean, China's the same way. If you don't have the grades, you don't go to secondary school
and like
at all.
There's a little bit of there's a little bit of wiggle room, and I think it's changing, but it's just like a whole different, like an entrance exam to university, and what you study is kind of determined on what you could like. I could be like, oh, I want to be a doctor. Like, I'll probably get into some medical school. Maybe I'll fail out, but I'll have the chance to like try it. Whereas in Spain, it's kind of, you don't really get the chance to try it so much.
Interesting.
And so but it's weird. It's like that. I'm thinking about predestination versus sovereignty. And it's like, there is a kind of like, we kind of need a structure and a higher vision, but it's you know, you were talking about like predestination is saying that there's this like a plan, but it's not yours. But I mean, I live from the concept of like of an eternal, or like the knowledge of myself as an eternal being. So it's like I live from self-responsibility, and even that predates my physical existence, which is like, you know, not everyone's going to agree, but it kind of changes things on how I approach life.
And I love that you brought that up, because I've only been able to recognize with life experience, especially in more recent years, certain things have happened along the way that were so what I needed and what I wanted, that if it was all up to my small self to make those decisions, I don't know that I would have sought out the right opportunities met the right people, made those moves. But when I met Sifu, it was almost like it was ordained.
Yeah.
And when or you know,
the timing of it,
timing.
And I think you could even tie in this concept of to predestination of when not destiny, but
Synchronicity.
Yeah, synchronicity, where it's just the timing of it seems like it was meant to happen.
Yeah.
And so the predestination, I think, an interesting layer on this is we have all of these different maps and ways to read our personality, read our astrology charts. We have enneagrams.
Enneagram.
We have all these different markers. And what I've liked about them when I've talked to people who have studied them way more than I have, they all say that they're just a guide. It doesn't mean this is who you are.
Right.
It's just these are your proclivities, the things that you have that could influence a way of being in the world, but they don't necessarily define 100% one way or the other if this is going to be your reality or not. You know, it's like, to your point, if your grades aren't up to par in the thing that you're really interested in, up tough, you're not going to even get the chance. Whereas it's just setting up a framework for you to work within. So it comes back to you with structure, this idea of having a structure to something where you can then work with that structure to see how much of it still continues to apply as you grow and as you evolve. And the thing that I really like about it too is that when you are looking at those types of guides, it gives you a little bit sense of self-awareness to where you are in your path, your trajectory, in your story that you're writing. You know, it seems like the chapters are already kind of fleshed out. Or not fleshed out, sorry. They're open-ended, but you have bullet points.
Outlined.
They're outlined. Yeah, you basically, the predestination is the outline to the story.
I like that.
And the sovereignty part of it is you filling in the middle.
Yes.
So you have these checkpoints that you're coming up to, and you're going to hit that checkpoint because it's already there.
But it's like, how do you hit the checkpoint?
Right.
Or how do you get there? And
Chris, something you said earlier made me think, when you're younger, especially, we'll just use that as an illustration, you feel like everything is maybe more predestined because you don't have as much control, as much power and responsibility and choice and sovereignty. But you're going along your path almost like kicking and screaming sometimes because there's more resistance to the things that are happening, and what's happening, it feels like it's happening to you because maybe you're moving in life more unconsciously. And then the more conscious you become of what you want, what you need, who you are, your ability to impact fate gets greater.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it does, I want to say, happen to you from a certain degree, like when you're young, you know, like you're building these structures of who you think you are. And then that's why I said levels of will, because like I used to, you know, when I was at 16, 18, I thought I was like the shit. I had everything figured out. Like, you know, everything was Gucci, just like, and then now that I'm 31, I'm like, I know less than I ever knew before, but that's actually a good place to be because there is stuff that I do know, but it's like.
So how does that tie into will?
Well, that regaining agency progressively, and it's like until you grab life by the horns, like the checkpoints are there kind of for you, but I think eventually you can kind of change the checkpoints. But then that goes back to the conversation around structure, and I think we're talking about free will. So freedom, what is true freedom? And I think for me, in my experience, true freedom has been realizing alignment with a higher will, and that my part
Your
of that
higher will or like an external will?
Both. I mean, you know, I use the word God. Like I remember before I am where I am today, there was this realization of like, oh, true freedom is actually aligning with the will of God as opposed to I'm going to do what I want.
Right.
Because as I looked inside, the I'm doing what I want was always coming from like the shadow, the like unbalanced, the like not best for me place. And that when
it's very rebellious. It's coming from that place of like, fuck the establishment, you know, kind of mentality.
Yeah. So, and it's like, but will of God, then I had to like use a growth and discernment around what that was. It's not like, oh, I go to church and the priest tells me that that's the will of God. It's like me going within and hearing that voice or experiencing that guidance for myself. And it looks all sorts of ways, but sometimes like you're talking about those like
critical moments,
that in a sense is the way I live my life is opening myself to experience the communication of that higher will in all forms, whether it's not just in your head, in your ear, in your nose. Like sometimes it's just a moment, it's just a feeling. It's like, and that's where it takes a lot of like practice to tune into that.
Totally. I'm seeing a bridge here between the more spiritual understanding that you're unfolding for us, where let's say you have your higher self who has the larger game plan and the playbook that it has access to, that the small self might not. Hence, like those critical choice points that you line up with, you're like, oh, it was perfect for me, but maybe if it was all up to me, I wouldn't have made the exact move. But I also think, so maybe that's like a top-down way of seeing this conversation. And I also, I always do this. I love Carl Jung's ideas about it, where
shocking.
Yep, you have the higher self is an internal being inside of you that is so ancient and so super meta conscious that it is interpreting and seeing and sensing potentialities in such an advanced way. And the right brain, the intuitive side of the human being, is supposedly way more tapped in as a main line to that part of the human being. So when you get an intuitive nudge to move in this direction, go to that restaurant at that time where you meet the right person, and it can feel random to the small lower S self, but your higher self is sensing all of this ahead of you.
Yeah. And I think like you slowly start, I talked to a lot of people that like they don't trust themselves because they just didn't listen to that intuitive non-rational thing over and over again.
Well, how much do they practice it, I think, is another thing. Especially in American culture, we have these very kind of strict lines around what's expected of people. Is you go to school, you go to kindergarten through 8th grade, then you move into high school, then you go to college, maybe
you figure it all out.
Then you get your first job, then you're supposed to buy a house, and you're supposed to have some kids, and you're supposed to do this. There's a lot of supposed to's
in this economy.
I know, right? Jesus. But there's a lot of supposed to's, and there's a lot of hard lines around that type of framework. And that framework is so generalized, it does not fit, I think, a large percentage. I wouldn't say the majority.
I am supposed to be balling though.
Right? It's balling out.
I think that fits into the conversation that we had around the bar, because at least the way I understood why is the bar so low was that, and you're talking about Jung, the collective conscious, he coins that, is like, it's because it's a conglomeration of like the lowest common denominator of shit. Those supposed to's come from just like,
but it's definitely a powerful force that we have to contend with. And
so you have to accept it as a reality,
which a lot of people do. A lot of people, like, again, it does come back to that, because a lot of people judge themselves against that as if it is a criteria from which they should judge themselves. And in reality, if you're supposed to be a beekeeper, but you're trying to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever those high paying professions or whatever, or you're being in an office in a cubicle, the most removed thing you can from nature. And your purpose, the thing that you were like, your guidepost is trying to lead you to, is to get back into nature, to get back into communion with the earth. And when you remember that when you were a kid, when you were working in the garden with your mom or whatever, and that was the happiest you remember being, but you're like stuck in a cubicle, very matrixy.
Mr. Anderson.
Exactly.
Well, Ian, this really touches on an interesting thing, because something I've realized, and I would love to hear how you guys feel about it, is now in my life, I find myself reorienting to the things I loved when I was a kid, before all the collective conditioning set in.
And trauma, our amazing producer and my beautiful wife put up a wonderful prompt and question for us, is how does trauma or childhood shape our predestination? Which I think is an excellent question.
Yeah.
The way I see that question framed is like, are you asking, is our trauma predestined?
Let's go. Let's go.
Ra-ta-ta-ta, full clip.
Did we choose our parents? Did we choose the trauma?
Did you
I chose
choose
you,
to come in to
Patrick.
be impacted in those ways?
What'd you say?
I choose you, Patrick.
And you, Ian.
Yes.
And
we're
you,
doing it.
Eden.
Where am I in this conversation?
But really, I choose myself.
Yes. I mean that, and honestly, that's something that really people should do more is, and not from an egoic perspective of like self-importance of like choosing yourself, but people lose themselves very often and will make decisions that are in their severe detriment for what they think is the right thing to do for somebody else's betterment. And it's not to say you shouldn't be altruistic and think of the other, like you really should, but at the same time, you can't serve from an empty cup. You have to fill your own cup first and make sure that you're good and taking care of yourself. And when we're talking about will and willpower and these different levels of will, which I'm very interested, I'd love to come back to that too. Because I think like truth, there is a truth. Personally, I think that there is like,
It's my truth.
there's a fundamental, but I feel like there's a fundamental truth, and part of the triad of the pyramid that is the Fate Boys is seeking truth, this idea of really getting down to the root of it all. And I think you can have your opinions and you can have your individualistic truth and your own idea and your own perspective and opinion on things, but regardless of those, you still have something that is at the baseline that's kind of infallible. And I feel like the same can be said for will. I think there's degrees of which that you are applying it, but will itself is kind of finite. Like Yoda, there is no try. There is do or do not.
Yeah.
There's
Wait,
like
will is
you
finite?
either are moving with that will or you're not. It's like regardless of the degree to which you're doing it, if you're trying to diet and you're like, maybe I'll do it today, but then I'll have a cheeseburger tomorrow. Like your will is very weak.
Right.
But it's diffused. And people would say, well, what's the degree of will? And I would say there's none. Because even if you did it for a day.
But what will? Is there a high, is it like there's will of like, I get what you're saying. Like
That's why I'm curious of kind of breaking this down. Cause like when I hear different levels of will, I'm like, I don't know if I fully understand what you mean. And I'd like to.
Well, maybe more simply put around like
put a
strength of will is how you were saying. But I think or ask myself a question of like, what will is it my egoic will? Is it like, because there's still that there is like a drive, and I would call that a form of will, even though it's impulsive. I think it's connected to, you're talking about truth and reality, and I see like will is measured against some form of understanding of the truth or reality, right? Like, so there's the ego coming from a survivalist, and you have a will, but it's more of a drive and impulse.
That's like self-preservation.
Yeah, but it's like there almost is a will, but that goes into like the sovereignty and agency. Like will is understanding and claiming that, and then it's the force that pushes you into action.
It's also the most pure expression of the self, like the true authentic self, because you cannot will from a place of unconsciousness. You have to really claim, like, what am I willing?
I disagree. I disagree. I think a lot of people are being led by their subconscious, or rather, they are not conscious. Therefore, they are just acting impulsively.
So they don't really have.
But the driving force that's making them get up in the morning and do these things or whatever, I think this is actually a really good tie into the predestination versus sovereignty thing. They feel like they're a victim to their circumstance because they don't have that agency. They don't have that sense of sovereignty. And so they're allowing that sense of predestination. I guess this is just my lot. I'm bound to be this. And they're allowing that to be the driver who's sitting in the driver's seat, their will, so to speak, of willing themselves forward in that. I hear what you're saying, though, because I feel even as I'm talking, like that is saying that you are bringing awareness to the fact that I am willing this, and therefore having some sort of control versus not.
They're expressing their will in some capacity.
At the top. Perfect. Thank you.
And so it's like, what if they redirected their will of waking up in the morning and going to work and being a victim to
hashtag victim.
I mean, it's part of my brand. But South Park reference for all y'all out there. Good new season. But yeah, so it's like there is more of that but I see that with people that are in a victim state.
That they're willing
It's
it.
it's in a sense, or they're accepting it. It's like a mind state, because eventually it's weird. It's like the only defining factor that I've seen in people that like get out of their circumstances versus not. It's like that you could say luck and you can say all this other stuff. At the end of the day, there's people that just like will themselves to change.
I
And
say
there's
it's
people that don't.
perseverance. I think it's perseverance.
Yeah, but I
too.
think will is what is at the foundation of perseverance. Because like in my own experience, I've been depressed and I've been in all those victim modes, and it's like, but and then I have friends that are like still in that victim mode, and I'm like,
What shifted you out of that, Chris?
Huh?
What shifted you out of that? I think
There was a deep inner, I would say, desire, but it was willpower. It was like I would say hope and all these things that sound kind of like ethereal and nice, but there was a true sense of like there has to be more, and I want it and I deserve it. And that can lead to entitlement, and I definitely have had entitlement, but like it was still had enough root in truth and in goodness, if you will.
Sure.
However broadly defined you want to put that, that it like the universe, as I'd say, responded to me and gave me opportunities to say yes or no. And I could have continued to be victim, but instead I said, I'm willing to take more responsibility. And
I think that's a big piece. Responsibility is key.
And once I did that, it fucking sucked. And it still sucks. But like life sucks. So which one do you want to choose? Well, life doesn't suck, but like, life is hard.
Challenging,
right?
sure.
No matter what. So it's like, as I continue to accept responsibility, I'm like, it's worth it. To me, it is. And
I love that.
And that's where it's like, it's my willpower, because you put me next to the same people going through similar things, and they're just like,
Well, I love. And
I'm not better than them. It's just
No, you're just at a different place in your progression. Like, it's not about a hierarchical, like being better than somebody else. It's just recognizing where you are on that path. So I think as a tip that I have given to a lot of my friends, and as a piece that you just said there, which I think if you're struggling with this mindset of feeling like victim, feeling like you don't have a lot of agency, you don't have connection to your sovereignty, you don't have these things, and a lot of things are just kind of happening to you, take responsibility. It hurts. The first when you first start doing it,
it's a cold shower.
It's a bitch.
Hurts. Because you have to admit to yourself that you fucked up. You have to admit to yourself and other. You don't get to be quiet about it.
Right.
The act of taking responsibility is coming to the forefront to a person and saying, you know what? I fucked up. I am so sorry that happened.
You also get to, on the positive side, you get to take responsibility for the goodness that's happened in your life.
Yeah, I was going to get there.
Sorry.
Kanye, God, coming at me. So I'm going to let you finish, but I'm going to interrupt you anyway. But the responsibility, when you take responsibility from that way, it's like literally is a superpower, because there is nothing that any person who's going to come at you with anything that is going to be able to do anything different than what you just did. You screwed up. You relate. You did the thing. Yeah, I just said that. I literally just said it. I feel the knot in my stomach that I'm doing to myself of, oh man, I was out of integrity. I did that thing. I took responsibility for it. And they're like, you were da 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 da. And you're like, yeah, we've been there. Like, what are you talking about? So the benefit of that is it basically creates an impenetrable shield around your character that allows you to walk forth kind of in that white knight ideology of like, I know that I'm doing my best, because anytime that I come up short, I'm the first person to call out my own name. And you literally get to walk through life unscathed.
And people trust you
because you don't have to worry. Yeah, people trust that implicitly.
And that's where like you're breaking out of predestination. It's no longer based off an outside factor
that's going to trip you up.
Like people like, and you can be in true humility. You're like, I don't have to feel shame about you telling me I'm a piece of shit, because like I understand like what I did right and what I did wrong. And of course you can learn and gain input from outside sources per se, but like as a reflection, but not as a like, they're determining my reality. And the thing that really comes up for me around simply put like will is you have to decide, and it's a decision. Like, I'm deciding to do this.
So we have some definitions that our amazing producer and my lovely wife Eden has put up on the screen for us.
Read them, Patrick.
So, Patrick, can you read them from there?
You want me to start with from the
If
top?
you can, you're getting kind of squinty over there. So just...
I think the first one would actually be will, because it literally speaks to what Chris was just saying.
All right, we're going to hit it. Will, the faculty by which a person decides on and initiates action, and a deliberate or fixed desire or intention.
Love
boom.
that.
Mic drop, except we
Very
won't drop
clear.
these mics.
Very clear definition. I want to branch off of what you both have been riffing on. I think we're at a beautiful point where we're bringing responsibility, going within.
Wait, are you going to read sovereignty?
We got to read the other definitions first.
No problem. Predestination is divine foreordaining. I've never seen that word before. Of all that will happen, especially with regard to the salvation of some and not others.
Damn.
Interesting.
Damn.
She don't want to be saved.
Okay, so divine.
She wants to be
is
left in that
an
tower.
Yeah.
Okay. So sovereignty, supreme power or authority, or a self-governing state.
The latter is what I think
I
of.
like.
I think of the latter when I think of it.
A self-governing state.
But you've been bringing it in as that kind of God entity, which would be that supreme
but it is
power,
self-governing
authority.
because like my perspective is like my higher will is the God, like I have a God self.
But when you're referring to it though, I've heard you a few times on this cast like refer to it as that like bigger than.
Mhm.
And so there is that kind of supreme power or authority that is the driver of the will,
which everything
right?
else is measured against.
Right. So but for me, when I use that term, it's much more the latter half of that, or a self-governing state, meaning coming back to the responsibility piece. And then I definitely want to come back to what you wanted to say as the segue pre-definitions. Is that responsibility piece is self-governing. I'm not reliant on the sheriff to tell me that I'm messing up, or somebody else, my teacher, to call me out because I'm not paying attention. I'm aware I'm not paying attention. And so if I'm self-governing and I'm like, get your stuff together, man, like pay attention, I'm bringing that sense of responsibility to the table. Whereas if I'm reliant, which unfortunately I think a lot of people are, on other or outside factors to be their governing vessel, like where's their accountability? Where's their sovereignty?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, from what is the measure by which you're self-governing?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think that's the bridge right there.
Hit it.
Is
Get him.
something that has
Dab it.
significantly helped me realize more agency and willpower, even in just recent weeks, is the more I let go of that craving, that coping of trying to change or reference external reality to determine how I feel, what I think, the choices that I think I have sovereignty over. The more I go within and let go of trying to control the outside, go within, and how can I master myself? How can I know myself more deeply? How do I starting from the origin, and instead of trying to find that safety in like moving the pieces of my outside world around, how can I?
We've all done that.
Oh, of course.
We've all
I
done
think
that.
it's a natural part of being human, but the more I exert will on my thought patterns, or trying to make choices from within and taking responsibility for my inner world as opposed to the outer world, I feel like I'm way more able to exert my will in outer life.
Yeah, I see that too often, where people are requiring outside world interactions to be their sense of safety. So like creating like these safe places or these things where it's basically and I think that there's value to that too in really harsh environments. But in general, I don't think it's actually doing anyone a service by telling society that they're required to participate in your sense of
I was going to
situation.
say the fun part is, at least for me, in taking more self-responsibility, is that you try to find those comforts and really you'll just be reflected back your shadow. So you're probably not going to really find that comfort, or it's a false comfort because it is there, but and then you're never really experiencing the true satisfaction that you're probably looking for.
Hmm.
Well, I think you're looking for that acceptance. I think you're looking for that validation.
Mm-hmm.
And external validation, I think, oftentimes can lead to problems.
But without internal validation, like true internal validation, I think that's what we're all seeking, is that we because you're talking about self-governing and sovereignty.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to know that you're good without having anyone to tell you that you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Game changer
you can
for
have
life.
people telling you're good. Like my parents told me that I was a good student and I'm a good person and this and that. And, I believed it.
That
But
has an impact too, because if you have someone
it
telling you you're a
does.
piece of shit
For
every
sure,
single
for
day,
sure.
Mirroring is a real thing.
But even
100%.
on the positive side, people can be like, "Oh my God, you're so smart," or "You're so this, you're so
Overly
that," and you can be
validating.
like, "I don't fucking believe it."
Yeah.
Especially
what
when you have an
matters.
abundance, when you have an overabundance of people telling you like all these positive
Mhm.
things. I would
Yeah.
say from my own experience, that has definitely been true. I've had a lot of cheerleaders in my life, which
You're a fucking G, man.
I've had a lot of cheerleaders in my life, which I don't want this to come across as being ungrateful or feeling like, oh, poor guy who's had everybody support in his whole world, in his whole life. But there is a certain downside to constantly getting adulation. And like when you're going through a rough bit, trying to like calm it. I remember when I was younger, and this would be an interesting topic too. I should write it on the piece of paper and throw it in there. It's just anger, specifically for boys, specifically for men.
So important.
And I didn't feel safe or comfortable in my anger. And it took me a while to really, and I really attribute our martial arts instructor helping me really tap into that in a healthy way, of being able to really understand how to work with that energy, with that emotion. And I remember when I was with my mom, who at the time it was just her and I think it was probably like 12 or so. And she had come up through a very violent and not good background when she was younger. And so being big and loud was really threatening for her and her psychology. And so it was really hard for me as like a boy coming into my like teenage years, and having a lot of emotion and having and I didn't feel like it was a safe place for me to do that or to exist in that way. And having to really understand how I can be and experience that emotion in that way of being, and experience my anger in a way that was actually healthy and not destructive. And it's challenging.
Ian, I like that you brought up emotions and experiencing emotions here, especially the more prickly ones like anger or grief. Those are easier illustrated examples that everybody can relate to. But I like bringing up emotions here in the concept of predestination, because in many ways, I would say that when I'm having an emotional experience, I didn't choose to have that emotional experience. So it's almost like life and people and stimuli impacting me, maybe like a predestined kind of way. I'm not choosing it necessarily, but where the choice and the sovereignty can come in is, how do I respond to these emotions? How do I hold my anger? How do I express my grief? How do I direct the emotions that are coursing through me?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just a microcosm maybe for how to meet life. Like, life is happening. You're in this river that's flowing in a certain way. How am I going to row my little boat through this river at this juncture where it's moving a little more slowly and calm versus where it's rapid and angry?
Yeah. I think an analogy that keeps coming up for me when in this conversation is a choose your own adventure book. And for those who don't know what those are, which I think is everybody, but anyway, I'll talk about it, is when you're reading a book, they'll get to a point where you get to decide if you're going to go to the dungeon to free the princess or you're going to go slay the dragon. And you get to it's a pivotal moment where you are diverging down a pathway.
Which one would you choose, Ian?
In that situation, I'd probably go dragon first.
Okay.
And the reason why is from like our Kali background is you have to take out the weapon first before you can keep going. So if there's a weapon in play, you have to take out the weapon. So the dragon's going to continue to be a threat, even if I rescue the princess first. So I'm going to go ahead and slay that dragon, then go rescue the princess. How very daring.
I like the metaphor too of like the mountain. Like we're all on the same mountain and we're all climbing it, but we all get to climb it however the hell we want.
But when coming back to what I was saying about the divergent point in a story, is we all have those breaks in the road where we with our relationships, with jobs, with whatever, and we have to make, even if we feel like life is kind of pushing us one direction and we didn't really make that choice. In the context of a choose your own adventure book, they tell you what page to turn to continue the story. So like if you choose to go slay the dragon, turn to page 42 because your story is now going to continue this way. So I think that there's an interesting aspect of this predestination versus sovereignty or fate or destiny that we're talking about, where it's like you do have that agency, you do have that sovereignty to, I'm going to go slay that dragon, but
the dragon's this tall.
The predestination is, okay, we'll turn to page 62 then, and this is now going to be the result. You know, there's a cause and effect to the actions and things that we do, and whether the severity of that, I think, there's a lot of different reasons as to why things will happen. The severity of an action will transpire, but it's also, if you're talking about it from a predestination perspective, it was supposed to happen that way anyway.
Yeah, like you're talking about, like going down, it's like we're going down the river of fate, but it's like, how do you choose to row, and like how are you navigating in that river?
And that river is going to take you to that deposit. That deposit's going to happen regardless.
That's the sovereignty. And then you're like, and you were talking about the emotions and how I've developed within myself, and you're talking about the book, I'm relating it, that like you'll know what page to turn to by assessing your reaction. So like maybe the emotion is like, I didn't choose it, blah, blah, life is happening to me. But claiming and feeling the anger or whatever it is.
Sure.
I mean, we could do a whole thing on anger.
That's why I said I'm going to write it on a slip of paper. We're putting it in the
that's
in
really,
the jar.
That's a really important topic, especially around
men and boys. Yeah.
And so, in that assessment of like, how do I choose to react? Like,
well, the way that Patrick was talking about it, I think, is exactly to that point. He's saying like the predestination of fate has cast me into the situation, and where I have the sovereignty is how I choose to respond to it. I didn't choose to become angry because of the stimulus that hit me, but now that I'm experiencing it, I have responsibility, control, and action. I saw this quote that said, you are still responsible for your actions regardless of how you felt or feel.
Yes.
And I really loved that. I loved that idea that you are still culpable, like you're still accountable to the things that you did, even though you might have justifiable reasons.
I committed murder. I was angry, it's all right.
I mean, when Will Smith slapped the shit out of Chris Rock because he made an off-color comment in a joke about his wife, he took that shit real personal, and during an award show walked up and slapped the shit out of him. There are recourses and consequences for taking action on something, even if you feel it was defensible. Even if the action you feel was like, no one's going to slander my wife. Yes, my honey.
Do you feel like Will Smith was predetermined to slap Chris Rock? Sorry, because they won't hear it.
I think they do hear it in the background. But so our producer and my beautiful wife, Eden Shaw, just came out with a really good question. Was it predestined for Will Smith to slap Chris Rock? Was that written down in the books of time that said on this day during this show, Will Smith is going from the hip, just lambaste
out your mouth?
Oh my God.
Probably not, but he was also he was probably also just reacting to his emotion, and instead of assessing it, he just reacted and went along with it. So in a sense, he was being guided by something else, higher forces, maybe not.
I don't say higher forces. I just think he was being reactive.
I don't like the word higher forces there, but like he was allowing himself, and that's where it's like allowing, because even.
That was also Will, though. I mean, ironically, Will Smith, but like,
oh, nice.
Where's his will?
He was using his will. He walked up on stage during a show that was being publicly
a black tie event.
Yeah, and it's just like everyone thought it was staged at the beginning when it first
Yeah.
happened. They're like, oh, they planned this, and then how Chris responded was really, really great. I mean, he had the most professionalism out of anyone who just took it on the chin, literally, in that experience. It was nuts.
One idea that has really changed my life, not to be too dramatic about it, but it seriously has. It's from a book that my friend Ram, shout out to you, buddy.
Shout out Ram.
He lent me this book called The Adventure of I by Tanya Kotsos, brilliant woman. And she talks a lot about feedback loops and cause and effect and where human agency is and all of that. So I will fully admit and take responsibility for the fact that for most of my life up to this point, I have very much been at the effect of my life as opposed to being the cause. And what I mean by that is something happens in my outer world and I'm reacting to the thing that happened in my outer world. So I am at the effect of a cause that
You're at the
I'm
mercy of the
externalizing.
predestination.
Right.
What is your thought around like
Chris Rock?
No, like the experience of the outer actually being a reflection of the inner.
That's what I'm getting to is
Kanye, God.
instead now what I've been
They want the Kanye.
I want graduation Kanye. Whereas nowadays I really do my best. I do my best. It's a learning experience every single day of how
Do better.
Yeah, so something happens in the outer world, it impacts me emotionally for sure, but then the emotion happens and I'm sitting with it and then I feel into it.
Mm-hmm.
How am I choosing? The emotion's happening. I can't repress it. I'm learning that every day. You can't repress it. But my agency is how am I going to express or think through or exert my will in response to that impact?
It's a
from life.
skill. I would say
Yeah.
it's a skill. I think
And
it's something like any skill when you're learning how to do anything, whether it's sewing, using a knife in the culinary situation, or a martial skill, having awareness and how you apply it. I think that's the answer to that question.
Are you choosing your thoughts?
Well, so that's interesting. So talking about the feedback loop, because the subconscious mind gives us a lot of inertia, we have a lot of patterns, unconscious patterns that are running through us, and thoughts are included in that. So I get intrusive thoughts all the time that I no longer agree with, and when those thoughts come through my holo screen, now I do my best to snag it before it hits the mainframe and like, how do I feel about this?
But
do I still agree with it?
Are you acting out most like from your thoughts? Like what's causing you to act?
I would say desire causes me to act. So desire, I feel a desire.
Where does that come from?
I think desire actually comes mostly from the unconscious and the subconscious, but then it gets brought into consciousness by amplification.
Then how do you know like your desire is worthy of acting?
That's
being acted
where
upon?
That's where you have to look at it and bring it into the light, and then from will act on that.
So
desire.
That's where I had a question for both of you, just to bring this into the practical, because I feel like we like to bring it.
Hit us, Kanye. What you got?
Is what are, and I mean, I know you mentioned martial arts, but I'll let you both kind of explore it however you want or answer it. It's like, what is it that you're using to develop your will and strengthen it, and like, maybe even the concept around like purifying, cleansing your conscious, subconscious, so that you know that you're getting desires that are worthy of your actions.
I love that. I think when you want something enough, the will is empowered by that desire. And I think the more you can also bring your thinking, mental side to it as well, you can really see like, why do I want this? I think the why is crucial there. Why do I want this? Yeah. Ian,
so like you were talking about the external reality and then not being happy about that. So like, what do you do in your life to go back to gaining agency and sovereignty?
Practical tip.
Well, I think what you said earlier is
I need a pro tip.
He needs a pro tip.
Just a tip.
Just a tip. Pro tip.
I think you need to feel the tip of the pain.
It's the best part.
Feel it through, because life can be very painful, and that can actually catapult you into a state of responsibility.
You don't want to get shafted.
No. Well, it depends. I mean, it goes back to what Ian and I were talking about in a previous episode where, I remember the day that the pain of not being healthy and fit really hit me
God,
enough
yeah.
to where my willpower did not have.
You didn't always look like this? Oh, damn.
We'll bring up a picture in a later episode of
we'll do a whole.
previous
There's a
lifetime.
whole episode around that
Previous
too.
I thought he was born perfect.
Yeah. Ian, do you have any practical tips to close us out with on this?
I mean, we got 15 minutes or 10 minutes left now, so we have still enough time. But like to answer the question that Chris posed, which I really like, I think it's a really good question. It's like how do I see that, and how do I work with it? For myself, it's kind of an aggregate of my experience, and I think I've had a fair variety of different exposure to different ways of thinking, different practices, different tools. And by doing that, you kind of put on jackets and see if they fit.
Well, which are the ones that have either fit the best or are you're using now?
Great. So I'll talk to that for myself. But I also want to say that it's not a one size fit all t-shirt. So the ones that work really well for me, one is martial arts and fitness. When you get into your body, it requires you to become present. Mm-hmm. One thing that I used to say to people is my boxing is my meditation. And when you are sparring with someone, you're not thinking about what you're making for dinner. You're not worried about the IRS taxes or whatever. You're worried about that cross coming towards your face. And you're required to get into the moment, into the minute, into the second, into the isness that is the only thing that is. Mm-hmm. There is no time. It's this construct. And the only thing that you'll ever experience is this present moment. And if you want to experience that, spar somebody.
And don't die.
And don't die. So you'll experience that by being in it. It's kind of, you get cast into it. It's required. And then from there, when you're feeling lethargic and feeling kind of in the pressure of the world in your brain is weighing you down with negative thoughts, and it feels like you're Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, and you're just like, everything is just a doom cloud. Mm-hmm. Walk, run, stretch, move your body, breathe. Change and like state. Those, just changing my physical state changes my mental state, which 100%. Changes things into different ways of being. So I would say the primary one for me is fitness.
So how does that transfer over into like when you're just living your life and not doing fitness?
I mean, fitness is part of my life.
Yeah, but I'm saying like in those in between moments, you're sitting on the couch, or are you getting a phone call, or you're like waiting in line at Starbucks.
So again, like these things are tools, right? Yeah. These things are the ways that you can apply them to situations. I'm not going to be holding two knives, shadow boxing down the street with them while I'm going to get coffee.
I wish it would.
Because it's not an applicable moment for me to use that tool, that skill. Mm-hmm. Same thing for if you are fluent in multiple languages. It's like that skill of being polylingual. Mm-hmm. You're not going to apply that in every single moment of every single day. You're going to kick that out when someone who's like in duress and they're like, does anyone speak Portuguese? And you're like, oh, I speak Portuguese. But I guess, like, sweet, it's a skill I can use.
I'm getting to like, do you feel that, you said you use martial arts and you're present when you're doing martial arts and sparring.
Yeah.
Does that somehow transfer over to you for being more present in your regular walking down the street?
100%. And the way that works is because I have the contrast of those experiences. Mm-hmm. I know what it feels like to not be present, and I know what it feels like to be present. Mm-hmm. And so if I want to bring more presence to my reality, I have tools and ways of which to doing that. Mm-hmm. But that's a great question. Like, how do you apply those things, or what does it look like, and how do you know? And that's why I said at first that it's an amalgam of my experience, because I've been exposed to so many different ways of thinking, different ways of working with my energy, my emotions, either through therapy or through physical practice or through different religious studies, and like looking at these different ways of being in the world. And you try them on, you see what works. Like diet's not going to work for, like being a vegan isn't going to work for everyone.
Cold plunge works real well for me currently. I do obviously I do like, rituals for like energetic reset, which is like going to the thoughts and all that, but like just the willpower, which is what more topic of the conversation is, like I really see that transfer instantly. If you're willing to get into something that your body's telling you you're going to die and be able to control it, it's so much easier to like go do the thing, you file your taxes, the thing that you don't want to do, you know?
Well, it's the idea of choosing something challenging. And I think that there was I can't remember the dude. It's the older dude from Shark Tank. He's shorter, gray hair. And he talks about how he's been so successful in his life. And what he does is he writes down on a Post-it note the things that he needs to do the next day that he's challenging, like he feels the most challenged.
Cash out my trust fund.
He feels the most challenged to do, to get off of his list. Like, I have to have this call. I don't like talking to this person, but
knock it out first.
And he writes the top 5 down, and he wakes up in the morning and he does at least like 3 of them. Like he just goes click, click, click. So the first thing out of the gate, you don't even get a moment to think about anything else. You've decided, the idea of deciding it and making it so that I'm gonna do that. And what he's done is he's set himself up in that framework of like, I have succeeded at doing something challenging, and that was the first action that I did when I got up. And that they have the whole analogy of making your bed, this idea of doing something that seems kind of rote and meaningless, but it's like you've accomplished something prior to even starting your day.
And you have total control over it. Like, there's no real excuse for not making your bed.
So,
well, I don't. I would, like, full confession.
I want
time.
you to share, because I feel like he shared really practical, and I know you do martial arts, but curious from your perspective around like maybe will, discipline, and art. Like,
so wow,
practical.
I love that example, because there have been times when I've tried to exert my will on my artistic practice, and it just totally sucked the life and soul out of it. But as soon as I was able to relax and listen to the muse and let the inspiration arise again, because it does, thank God, the muse returns always. And the will, the choice, is trusting that this inspiration is coming through, and how can I make an authentic choice about how to express the muse that's
well, you have to show up, right?
You do have to show up, and I think
that is the practice. You have to be present.
The routine. That's a great point. The muse is much more likely to present when you have that chosen routine of sitting at the desk at a similar time every day, and also investing, like making investments in the craft. Also, I've found signals to my muse, like, oh, he's getting ready to work with me. Like, he invested, he's excited about it. He's investing emotional capital into this project and thinking about it. And I think the will comes in a really good response to the desire to express the beauty that I'm feeling emotionally.
So coming to a close, and like, see if we can wrap a nice little bow on this.
That was a big one.
That was
big. Yeah, we meandered a lot through this river.
Is it predestined that we end the episode in an hour?
I mean, our producer thinks so. That's for sure. But
my sovereignty is aligned with that predestination.
Ooh.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about predestination versus sovereignty, and we've brought in will, we've brought in agency, these pretty big
choose your own adventure.
I mean, honestly, to me, that really kind of sums it up. Responsibility
was the big one.
I think that was a big aha. Yeah. I think responsibility was a really big piece of that, because when you have the self-accountability, which is brought around by responsibility to do so for yourself, which requires you to look internally, to use that as the guidepost to whether or not you are applying it successfully and authentically, against the guidepost of the predestination of where you find yourself.
Your cross-section in space.
How do you find your sovereignty in those moments?
And something that's coming to me that when we talk about responsibility is that, like, fate has an inherent sense of responsibility. We're thinking about it as like it's something happening to you, but in the fact that there's something like destined for you, whether you want it or not, is like, it's like there's responsibility waiting to be accepted,
and power that comes with that responsibility.
Like, there just feels like there's something there about that.
I love that optimistic.
Always an optimist, even though I have the Sith color.
I got them all going,
guys. That was a very fascinating episode. I feel like I was learning in real time about how do I feel about predestination.
I mean, that's the beauty of the jar of fate, is we don't know where we're going to go.
We don't know.
Where are we going to go next week?
Shout out to all my fate lovers.
We don't know. Let us know what you think. If there's any concepts that you would love and topics for us to throw into the jar, let us know.
We love your
We
feedback.
can even
friends,
pick from the
family,
Yoda's
strangers.
t-shirt.
And we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.